annual, but this is our fourth Tuskegee Town Hall. And as a lot of you noticed, we refer to these town halls as engaged empowerment town halls. And what we mean by engaged empowerment is that we at Tuskegee University, in partnership with the Southern Christian Leadership Foundation, we have a dual mission of engaging the community. And part of our purpose today is to distribute knowledge in a fashion that's empowered, right? So many of you know that I always say that knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. So with that being the case, the distribution of knowledge is empowering. It's empowering. What we have established over the last year and a half through the Tuskegee RCMI is a mechanism of distributing knowledge to the Tuskegee community. And we do that via the town halls. And we like to bring in a variety of guests from different places to share with you what they know. Right? How can we be better as a community by learning things that are oftentimes, that we are oftentimes isolated from? So what we're going to do now is I'm going to bring up our National Program Director, and he's going to give greetings from the Southern Christian Leadership Foundation, and he's going to lead us in an opening prayer. And I'm going to introduce our guests tonight. They traveled all the way here from Birmingham, Alabama, from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and they represent the Living Donor Navigator Program. And we're going to have a community discussion about what that means and what it means for our health destiny. So I would like to bring up Mr. Darryl Rock, and we will proceed from there.
Good evening. Once again, welcome to the Southern Christian Leadership Foundation. We thank you for coming out on behalf of our president in her absence, Ms. Bernice L. Frazier, on behalf of our board chairman in his absence, Dr. Harold L. Barnes. We would like to greet you and greet our guests from the University of Alabama, Birmingham for tonight's discussion. Also, we would like to say that if you have any questions, please engage live as you're sitting here. But more importantly, for those of you that are on social media, please engage your questions and we will get them to the necessary person so that we can try to get you better understanding of tonight's discussion. If there's nothing else, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you right now for bringing us together to learn more about our Living Donor Program. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the young people that are here, especially young people that are here tonight, that they may gain understanding of life's, what really matters in life as they proceed to be the young adults that you will have them to be. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the older individuals that are here, that they may understand the new technologies that are now presented before them, that we all may work together for the good of our African American communities, people of color, and for those all around the world. We thank you, Lord. We appreciate you. In your son Jesus' name, we pray. That all hearts abide, say amen.
Amen. All right, so at this point, we want to bring up our distinguished guests, Beverly and Dr. Jamie Locke. Good evening. So I do want to point out right now that we are streaming this on our Twitter feed, the Engaged Empowerment Twitter feed, and we're also streaming this on the SCL Foundation Twitter feed. And so part of the methodology for these town halls is that we are amplifying the voices of geographically isolated people. So you are in the Alabama Black Belt, and we understand why we refer to it as the Black Belt. This was a region in the southern part of the United States that had very rich growing soil. So the irony in that is that that growing soil attracted plantation owners, and plantation owners obviously attracted slaves. So even today, when we look at the distribution of poor people, poor Black people in our country, it is highly concentrated here in the Black Belt, right? And we like to refer to Tuskegee as the capital of the Alabama Black Belt. And so the streaming mechanism allows us to reach a very large audience of people who are not able to physically be here now. So we have a live audience, and as you can see, many of our beautiful students from Tuskegee University are here. And we also have Ms. Crenshaw, who is a cancer survivor, a 2-time cancer survivor, the distinguished Dr. Jemay, Mr. Leon Frazier, who has made groundbreaking innovations in law enforcement. And so I just want to recognize some of our elders, but I also want to recognize our young people who have made it here today. All right, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Great. Well, first, I just want to say thank you for allowing us to be here. It's really an honor and a privilege to have you guys welcome us into your community and to the SCO. Guess I'll get started. Is that okay? So my name is Jamie Locke. I am a transplant surgeon at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And I specialize in particular in kidney transplantation and helping individuals who may have developed end-stage kidney disease be able to achieve transplant and go back to having a life that is without dialysis. And in particular, we work really hard to help people achieve live donor kidney transplantation. So that's where you receive a kidney from a living person, because God made us with 2 kidneys, but we can live normal, healthy lives with just one. And so oftentimes individuals will donate one of their kidneys to a loved one or a friend in need so that they can come off dialysis. And so one of the things I do is specialize in helping to get that message out there. Many people don't realize you can be a living kidney donor and don't necessarily know what it means for them. So that's one of the things that I do. I also am what we call a health services researcher. So I know many of you, I think I heard someone here tonight, is getting a degree in public health. So I have a degree in public health. I'm very much interested in health disparities research. And that falls in line in particular with transplantation and the role that I play at UAB. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. But I'll turn it over to my colleague, Beverly.
Well, good afternoon or good evening. I'm so happy to be here this evening because I'm actually a native of Tuskegee. I grew up here. So it's very humbling to be back here to share with my community. I grew up in this area. I've worked in the area of donation and transplantation for about 14 years now. I started working with the Alabama Organ Center, just educating multicultural communities on the importance of organ and tissue donation, because it's really important. And as we start having these conversations, you're going to learn even more why living donation is a great option and why it's so important to have this information to share with your communities, to share with people that you know. My background is in community health promotion. It's an area of public health. And I love the work that we do because knowledge is power. Having this information can change your life. It can change your family members' lives. And so I'm just happy to be here with you all to share what we're doing here at UAB, to talk about our Living Donor Navigator Program and talk about the importance of living donation.
All right, so this is a great opportunity, a segue, as they say, to tell us a little bit about the Living Donor Navigator Program and what it means for our community.
So the Living Donor Navigator Program is amazing. I can't say no great things about it. I'm so glad that Dr. Locke and her team brought this program to UAB because the Navigator Program essentially helps patients find a living donor. And that's really important because kidneys are hard to come by. You know that there's a waiting list where people need a kidney for transplantation. And I think a lot of times we take that for granted. We take for granted how important our kidneys are until we're actually in that situation. But kidneys are hard to come by. And so living donation offers an opportunity for our patients to get transplanted. The challenge is that people may not know how to ask for a kidney. It's a hard thing to do. You're not asking for a car. You're not asking to borrow somebody's car. You're not asking to borrow $5. You're asking someone for a kidney. And as a patient, that's a hard thing to do. So the Living Donor Navigator Program, myself and Dashi Hendricks, who's another one of our navigators, we educate our patients and their families, including their families, on how to ask for a kidney. So whether it's through just education, learning about kidney disease and how it affects the body. I think as a patient, the patient understands that, but family members may not necessarily understand what that means and how they can help. And naturally they do, they want to help, whether it's through advocacy, getting their messages out or their stories out about being a living donor or their loved ones need for a living donor. We teach our patients and our families how to do that. We get really creative. We use Facebook and social media to put the messages out there. We partner with their churches, just a way to talk about their loved ones' need for needing a kidney. And again, we do this all through education, and having this program empowers our patients and their families to know that, you know, there is hope. We give them hope through this program, and that that they can get successfully transplanted. They have the right solution. So.
So effective, I'll nerd out. So 100,000 people in the United States are waiting for a kidney transplant, just waiting on the list. There are about 500,000 people on dialysis. So we have even more people who need a transplant than have actually been referred to a transplant center to be evaluated and listed. Of all those people, every year we only transplant just under 20,000 people a year. Okay, that's because the pool of donors is pretty fixed from a deceased donor side. And so it's not surprising that many people will turn to family members and friends to be living kidney donors on their behalf. But how you go about doing that, how you learn how to advocate for yourself is very, very important. And sometimes that role needs to be separated from the patient. So sometimes it may be that they need an advocate to help them or a champion in their life to help them. And that's really where friends and family can also come in, because they can help tell that story. And that's a piece of the Navigator program. The other thing I would say is that Beverly's very kind. This is not my program. This is actually the African American Communities program, specifically the Birmingham community. So when I came to UAB now 7 years ago, they asked me to try to help grow their living donor program. And I'd go to clinic, and every day I'd see patients in clinic who needed a kidney transplant. And I would also evaluate potential living kidney donors. And there were major racial differences in terms of the individuals who are coming forward to be potential and considered to be living kidney donors. And when I looked at the transplants we were doing, we just weren't transplanting very many African American patients with living kidney donors. It became very apparent there must be some sort of disconnect there. Why is that? Why would that be? And so I got involved with the Minority Health Research Center at UAB that's run by Dr. Fuad, and became one of their health disparities research training fellows. And in the course of that, really began to learn a lot about community engagement and learning from the community about what needs were. And was able to partner actually with Charles Barkley. He sponsors various research projects and had a keen interest in transplantation, because it turns out his brother was actually a heart transplant recipient many years ago. And he ended up funding a pilot study, and we were able to partner with local African American churches. And we went into and visited with about 7 different churches, and were able to receive feedback about the why. Like, why is it that we just don't have very many African Americans coming forward to be living kidney donors? And what we discovered was that part of the issue was people just didn't understand or feel comfortable with the process, with trusting that the process was going to be okay, that the medical community was going to do right by them, that they were going to be told the correct things, that they were going to be able to even navigate how you get from point A to point B, with point B being actually becoming a kidney donor. And so therein is where the Navigator program came from. We combine this concept of advocacy training, but also providing people with information and the tools to actually be able to navigate the evaluation process and to feel comfortable with it, because we teach you about it all along the way. It's not just kind of sprung on you. You actually become a part of that process yourself, where through knowledge, you actually are able to help drive the medical decision making. And we've found that to be highly effective. And Beverly and Doug are our navigators who help us do that. So that's how it all started.
Oh, well, fantastic. Well, that's very interesting. So tell us a little bit about the Champion program, the UAB Living Donor Champion program.
So that's essentially a part of the Navigator program. The Champion piece is the piece surrounding advocacy that Beverly was describing. And we call individuals in our patients' lives who can advocate for them, we call them their champions. So they're the live donor champions who help tell their story, get the message out that they need a potential living donor. We give training on how to do that. So conversation starters, we do role playing. We even give individuals anti-coercion training, because of course we don't want to coerce people into doing this. We want this to be an individual's decision. So that's all a part of the advocacy portion, which is the champions piece to this.
Okay, so there are clear divisions when we start to look at disparities in renal disease between African American and other populations, specifically white populations. So how can the Living Donor Navigator program help decrease some of those disparities?
That's a terrific question. So I'm going to nerd out again. Jump in if I get too crazy. So it's been known for years that there are disparities in the rates of end-stage renal disease in African American populations. People have tossed around all kinds of ideas. Everything from socioeconomic status being different to less likely to be compliant, not going to doctors, all of this. I've never really been convinced that any of that was 100% an explanation for the differences. And what's really interesting is that is correct, but it's not. And what we have learned relatively recently that there are some genetic differences that actually explain a great deal of this difference. So there is a gene called the apolipoprotein gene, or APOL1 for short. And you can have variants in this gene. If you have one risk variant for the gene, it puts you at slightly higher risk for kidney disease. But if you have two risk variants, it puts you at about a 7-fold increased risk. And what's interesting is that we see this 2 risk variant gene in people of African ancestry. You don't see it in people of European ancestry. And the reason is because on the African continent, if you have these 2 risk variants, it actually protects you from African sleeping sickness, okay? So over time, it made sense to evolve to have these risk variants because it actually protected you from a deadly disease. But now, as time has moved on, and that's not an issue, it's now the other future issues are happening, like kidney disease. The good news about that is that it impacts very few. Only about 13% of the African American population will carry these 2 risk variants. The other thing is, even if you have the 2 risk variants, it doesn't 100% mean you're going to develop kidney failure. There has to be some other hit that happens. But we're learning more and more about this. But what it also means is that our ability to identify and help people determine whether they're a good candidate for living kidney donation without putting them at extra risk has gotten a lot better in the last several years. So understanding that information, I think, becomes really important. And understanding that the risk that we have known about for the better part of 100 years has a lot more to do with just our genetics than it does with things like socioeconomic status or not doing what you're supposed to, things like that. And I think that's really important that we know and understand that and start communicating that message, because that is very, very important.
I think it just goes back to, as well, having this information. So the information that Dr. Locke has shared with us about these genes and these variances, understanding that and using that to empower our communities, and understand, how use it as an opportunity to make better decisions and things of that nature. And I think just, again, taking it back to that whole stance of being a part of these interactions, information, and using it to change our outcomes. There are a lot of individuals that are disease, as Dr. Locke has mentioned, over 600,000. But there are things to help prevent kidney disease, to keep it at bay so that you're not in a situation to where you may need a transplant later on. I think that's really important so that we can protect our status of our health, now and throughout. And if we're in that stage, maybe we can keep it at bay. So yeah, just using this information to empower communities.
Right, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. So help me understand a couple of things, okay? And I'm just from a lay person's perspective. I'm thinking, there are about people on this planet that I would give a kidney to. Like let's say my wife, my 2 sons, and my mom. Okay, and everybody else is kind of like, that's a big, right? So how do you help that? How do you address that level? Because obviously there's a higher level of thinking here, and there's a higher benefit there. And how would you address that? Because when I think of, to me, seems like the first thing that people would say, well, yeah, my immediate family, yes, but I don't know about the rest of the world.
And there's a sense of selflessness with this type of work, and with the individuals that selflessly just say it. And there are people that come along, anyone that directly needs a kidney, but will say, hey, I have 2 and I want to donate 1 to someone else. And I think it's a sense of selflessness. It is a sense of just wanting to help, wanting to save someone's life, wanting to improve their quality of life, and just thinking outside of that box. We have kidney swaps. We have chains to whereas, let's say if Dr. Locke and I don't match, then by me donating to matches, then we can swap kidneys. Now, I'm not donating directly to the person that I'm intended to, but it's still going to help my family member in the long run. And I think these people don't understand about there are options. And I think it just goes back to selflessness, just knowing that you can still live a full, healthy life with 1 kidney, and I can donate my kidney to someone else, and I'm still good. I'm still healthy. I'm still alive. And yet this person that I don't know is living a full, healthy life. There's a sense of fulfillment with that. And it's unlike anything else. And I think back to people who are deceased donors, for people that make that decision at the most inopportune time to give life to someone else, it's a powerful thing. And I think that's how we have to look at it. Just, if you guys believe in God, giving back to us and being able to share that and have that sense of completion.
There's altruism and our fellow man, that capacity to be a giver. But I would also say that living donation is more than just donating a kidney. There's really a role for everyone to play in this. Some of us may not be approved to be a living kidney donor for whatever reason. The doctors may decide that it's not in your best interest to do that. But there's still a role to be played, which is to share with other people the value in it, to help people that tell their story in the hopes that a living donor. And let me give you perspective for why, okay? We talked about that waiting list of 100,000 people, and less than 20,000 people are transplanted every year. death on dialysis while you're waiting for a kidney transplant is 5 to 15% per year. Okay. In Alabama, if you're a blood group, you're going to wait 10 years for a deceased donor. 10. You might not be alive in 10 years. And so that live donation, and you take that individual and you donate a kidney. We take that kidney from you, and myself or one of my colleagues has the privilege to take that little tiny thing. And it's cold and it looks blue and it's cold. And we take that and get it all fixed up. And we quite literally put that into another person. And as soon as I restore the blood flow from the person who's receiving it to that kidney, it turns pink and right before my eyes, and it immediately starts making urine. It is the most remarkable thing I've ever seen in my life. It is a miracle every single time. Every single time. And in an instant, you take someone who may not have been able to go to college, right? How do you do that and go to dialysis? So if you need dialysis, most people are on hemodialysis. They're hooked up to a machine for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, 3 to 4 times a week. You're either on the morning shift or the night shift, and you're either a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. How do you go to school? How do you hold a job, provide for your family? Here's one. How do you go on vacation? And so it takes people to participate in life to somebody who's just kind of hanging out. And so it transforms that individual. It gives them longevity. It puts them back on the same curve the rest of us are on in terms of life. And it allows them, but also their family on a daily basis.
Thanks. So we have a Twitter question, if that's okay.
Sure.
So is it possible to earmark a kidney, like a scholarship? Like, I designate this kidney for X.
So meaning at some point in the future?
What I think is that they have a kidney. Let's say they donate a kidney and they say, I want this kidney to go to this specific type of person.
Yes.
Like you may have a scholarship that says, hey, well, for low income people from Wisconsin. All right. And so is that possible?
It absolutely is. So we occasionally have individuals who come forward who are what we call altruistic donors or non-directed donors. These are individuals who don't necessarily know anyone who needs a kidney, but they've learned about how kidneys can help people and they want to donate to someone, but they have something specific in mind. So we've had people come forward who says, we would really like to donate to a child on your list. And we say, okay, no problem. And we partner with Children's of Alabama to identify a child on the kidney waiting list. And we make sure that that kidney goes to a child. So the answer is yes.
Okay. All right. And keep in mind that the questions are always open from the audience. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Crenshaw.
Can you tell us what the kidney, what the function is in the body?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. So the kidney just works like a great filter. So our body, just from living, sort of builds up toxins in our body. Ways to get rid of toxins by urinating those toxins away. So when your kidney isn't working, you don't actually filter some of those toxins out of your body, and you develop what's called uremia. And if you leave that untreated, in other words, if you're in kidney failure where your kidney's unable to filter those toxins out, if you don't receive dialysis typically within a week or so, you will pass away. That's how critical the kidneys are. They also regulate our volume status. What does that mean? It pressure, so it helps us maintain our blood pressure so that we have all out. But it also helps us so that we don't end up with high blood pressure. The kidneys, in part, plays a big role in that.
Mr. Frazier?
What are some of the habits that contribute to destruction of the?
These are great questions. So I will say there is a whole group of people who no habit of any sort. It was a congenital disease that they were born with, that of no fault of their own. It just That can happen in small kids, and there can be diseases that you live with throughout your life, and you ultimately develop kidney failure as a middle-aged adult. So those things can happen. But the two most common causes for kidney failure are diabetes and high blood pressure. So one of the biggest culprits for that is being overweight. And so eating good, watching your sugars, making sure that you don't eat bad foods. And if you do have diabetes or high blood pressure, making sure that you control them. So not being in denial about that, but really embracing that, embracing what your doctor is saying, making sure you take that medicine and you keep those blood sugars tightly controlled, that you keep that blood pressure in the range where you have all those conditions, and prevent yourself from developing kidney failure.
Cool. Can you talk a little bit about the outcomes of the study?
Absolutely. So it works. It's the coolest thing. So I get so excited. So we talked a lot about the fact that African Americans have a lot of having kidney disease. Okay, so that's important piece number one. The second piece is that when we have looked at donor recipient pairs, what research has shown is that race is about 95% concordant. So that means I'm most likely to identify a donor who's Caucasian. If I was African American, I'm most likely to identify a living donor who's African American. Okay, probably has a lot to do with our social networks if we're honest about it. Okay, so what that means though is if that is the case, because African American are more kidney disease, it probably makes it harder to find someone who can be a potential living kidney donor, right? Because my job is to sell for African Americans who bring more potential living donors. I mean, they're going to have more people interested in being a donor for us to find a way to do that without putting themselves at increased risk. So that's what our program does. For participants, you're not in, you completed your screening. We're telling you we want to bring it transparent. It gives us a lot of angst. It needs to be better. Really in Dodge Allocation Program, and they've really helped individuals move from where they are first talking to us on the phone and passing their initial questionnaire, their initial screening, all the way to coming in, being evaluated, and ultimately approved. An increase in the likelihood of approval. Works. And approved need to get really works, and it's
Patients left to their own devices to find a living donor, to do their own education. All that information can be very overwhelming, but when you have your transplant center that is there, not only there in that capacity to help you when you come to your day one clinic, but to help you not only their donors, to get them through that process, to follow up with them, to keep them engaged so that they will go through that process. It changes a lot because there are some transplant centers that don't offer that type of service or standard of care to their patients. And I think that's one of the things we're really proud about. And our patients love it. We have patients that come from all over to come to a Saturday morning class from 10 until 12 or a Wednesday evening class from 6 until 8. And they're just so appreciative. And sometimes I get emotional talking about it because you change their life and you give them hope as they go through this daunting process of finding a kidney, of finding donors. And so this process really helps change that. And we're just so happy to be able to have this program to offer to our patients.
Another question from our last. And what is the likelihood that someone can be pushed up on the kidney waiting list? So I think what they're saying is, like, if you're on the wait, like, what are the priorities for the waiting list? because we hear about this, you're on the waiting list, right? And so obviously this is very serious. And we've always heard stories of superstar is moved up on the list. And I remember reading about Mickey Mouse, baseball player, who needed a liver. And he some kind of way found his way at the front of the list. And so I hope I'm representing the essence of the question correctly. So what are the priorities associated with where you are on the waiting list?
For living donation, there you are the. It goes. If you're not a match, they're a match for you. The deceased donor is kind of this is by the Organ Procurement and Transplant Network, which is the United Nations Transplant Centers at this right. So you could be on a transplant center. Pays for dialysis. They can tell kidney doctors what to do, and basically made it a regards dialysis. They must refer that patient for transplantation. Okay, which is critical because we can't see someone for evaluation without a referral from their kidney doctor. Okay, so that has to be driven by the kidney doctors in the community, and that helped a lot. The second thing we did is we changed the allocation system in 2014. So it begins from your dialysis start date, all right? So if you unfortunately aren't referred to us until 10 years after starting on dialysis, you finally, for the first time, get credit for all 10 years you spent on dialysis. And so your waiting time shows 10 years. And that has made a tremendous impact in access to transplant for our minority patients that are on the waiting list. And preliminary data after the implementation of this new allocation system are showing that. So I think they were just two distinct things.
I understand. So let me ask you, so when we think about kidney donation, right? We think about kidney transplant. So what are some safeguards that you all have in place to ensure trust? Because part of what you're doing tonight, and part of what you're doing throughout the program is building trust, building a relationship between the institution and between the community. So how do you go about doing that? What do you all have in place for that? What's the mechanism for that?
I think, of course, like you mentioned, just being in the community, always having that connection with the community, just being transparent, answering any questions that may arise when it comes to living donation and organ donation. And I think it's been, of course, in our African American community, it's been very, with the Tuskegee study and things like that, hesitant to become a donor, deceased or living. And so always making that connection to educate. With our study and with the program that we currently have in place, we have that, you don't have to be a part of the program. You can drop out at any time. We can answer any questions that anyone may have. Empower our participants to ask those questions. Empowering our participants to let them know the risks that are involved. Just being very transparent, I think that goes a long way. I've done a lot of community education. I think, again, having that presence in the community can speak volumes to answer those hard questions that people may have that may be uncomfortable, but to answer those questions open and honestly, and just provide the best information and the best representation of your organization that you possibly can. It helps a lot. It's changed people's minds when it comes to donation because a lot of it is just misinformation. It's just having the wrong information and not changing that. And I think when I was working, doing more community education with the public, I was always surprised at the things that people didn't know about donation. And just making sure that you answer that you address those issues that people have. So that they have the right information. And everybody may not become a living donor or become a deceased donor. But my job is to make sure that you have the correct information to make the best decision that's right for you. And I think that's awfully important for people to have.
So how long is the transplant process usually? And what are some of the things that could possibly go wrong for the donor or the recipient?
Those are awesome questions. May I add one thing to the previous thing? Just provider and surgeon sitting up here. I think that everything that Beverly said. I also think, and I think my partners would agree, that it is our distinct privilege to help people with these kinds of things. I think people come to us at their most vulnerable state. I think we recognize that. And I think understanding that we are here to serve our patients instead of the other way around. And I think that really is a focus for us in transplant. My favorite thing to do at the end of an evaluation is to welcome someone to our UAB family, because that's how we perceive and view our transplant programs. And I think that's really what it takes, that you're really the understanding that it's our privilege to be of help, but that we are fundamentally, that we're in it together, but that we value very much the patient and their perspective and what the patient needs. And I just, ask me the question again, I'm sorry.
It was our process, and what are some things that can go wrong for being either a donor or a recipient?
So I would like the transplant process to take 1 day. It takes a bit longer than that. I would say start to finish, if everything ran smoothly, we could get you in, seen, approved, and transplanted within 3 months. Because at first, that's in the ideal circumstance. So you have to have a referral. Once the referral is made, we then have to bring mediation, and that requires 2 components. One is where we spend a whole day going over all the things that you can expect with transplant, making sure that questions are all the different types of transplants you can get in terms of types of kidneys you can receive and what that means for you, which ones are the best ones, all that kind of stuff. Things like that are in good shape because we need to make sure that surgery will do well with this precious gift that you're going to get. So those kinds of things take time, but I would say about 3 months. If you have to have additional testing or something like that, it could take longer. In terms of things that can go wrong, there are lots of risks anytime you have a surgery or have any sort of big medical procedure to go wrong or to happen. I'll say that for living donation, the risks are quite small. The most feared complication is development of kidney failure. It's what we worry the most about. And so when you're evaluated, we evaluate you from a medical perspective. And what do I mean when I say that? Our job is in that evaluation process to make sure that we think 30 years from now, you can do all the things that you were going to do with 2 kidneys. We want you to be able to do that with 1 kidney. If we think for some reason that you can't, we're going to recommend that you shouldn't be a donor. The surgery piece is more about getting you through the surgery and that first sort of month afterward. It's a little bit of an easier ask. Predicting what happens 30 years from now is a little bit of a harder ask. We are learning more and more about the risks associated with donation. I will say that we've been doing living kidney donation for a very long time. The first one was done in 1954 by Dr. Murray and colleagues at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. I can tell you since that time, there have been, almost 140,000 living kidney donors. And to date, fewer than 300 have gone on to be listed for a transplant themselves. So that tells you that we do a pretty good job of making sure that people are okay. To the Twitter question about lists and going to the top, that is one way to skip your way all the way to the top. If God forbid you are a living kidney donor and you develop kidney failure for whatever reason, accident, whatever, you go immediately to the top of the list and you get the next available deceased donor kidney in your blood group. We've built that provision in to make sure that our living kidney donors are taken care of. Again, out of almost 140,000 people, fewer than about have needed that option. In terms of the recipient, the things that we probably worry the most about are rejections. So when you get something that's not your own, your body is actually designed to fight that. It's how we fight off colds and other illnesses. So that immune system that does that for us, that helps protect us against the flu and other things, is great in that setting, but not so great when it comes to a transplant. And so we have medications that patients will take for the rest of their lives called immunosuppression drugs, and they work really well. So if you get a live donor transplant, roughly 98 to 99% of those kidneys are still working well after a year. So it works pretty well as long as people are taking their medications. But those are the things that we worry about.
All right. Yes, sir, Milo.
I was looking at the top of the research for the telehealth base. HPV on that. Is that kind of like telemedicine?
Thank you for asking about that. Yeah. So the Navigator program that we're super excited about that has worked, and we're seeing more and more transplants. We inadvertently created a new disparity. And leave it to us to do that. So when we first analyzed this, we had approached about 100 people to participate, and 56 did. And out of everybody else who did not, to a T, every single one of them reported that they 100% were interested and wanted to do it, but distance was a problem. So we created Geographic Disparity because the way the program was set up, you have to be able to travel to our center to be able to do it. And for some people it's work, some people it's economic, time, all of those kinds of things. And so we thought, well, gosh, we have this great partner with Tuskegee through our Minority Health Research Center. What if we took advantage of some of the fancy equipment that we have and actually try to offer this via telemedicine? Because Beverly and Dodgy can be in Birmingham, and with fancy cameras and all of that, we can still have that interaction. So it'll offer the Navigator program beyond just Birmingham. And so we're wanting to start that in Tuskegee because a lot of our patients who couldn't participate were in the surrounding area here. And we're piloting it here. And if that works, we're going to, which I think it will, we're going to also extend it to other areas, including as far away as Tupelo, Mississippi.
So it's in the process.
It's in the process.
Okay, so I have a question, and it's what does the representative of a nephrologist look like? Nephrologist.
That is a fantastic question. We need more. So we actually, so I sit on the American Society of Transplant Surgeons. It's one of the largest transplant societies in the U.S. I sit on the Diversity Affairs Committee. I'm currently chairing that. And we looked at this actually a number of years ago because it just seemed to us that when we looked at providers, it just didn't match our population. And I think there's something to be said for that. There's lots of research that says people are more comfortable. Whether you're talking about population, whether you're talking about African-American population. And so it's something that we're actively working on. We actually have a workforce initiative ongoing in the ASTS to encourage our minority medical students to consider careers in surgery and importantly in transplantation. And are working really hard to create a pipeline and to have opportunities. We also are looking to increase our leadership and minority representation in our leadership within our society, and have several new initiatives, including putting on a course on cultural inclusivity, which I think is critical important. I think it's organizations in the U.S. And is something that we have committed to. So those are all things that I think need to be in place to help solve the shortage. We got to have a pipeline, so we're working on that.
All right. Well, thank you. So, talk to us a little bit about the success and the failures of the program. So, what have been your biggest challenges, and what has been your biggest successes with the Living Donor Navigator Program so far?
I think our biggest challenge, and like Dr. Locke mentioned, is just not being able to provide the program everywhere. I think that's been our biggest challenge. Again, we see patients from all over the Southeast that come in to be evaluated to get on our transplant waiting list, but sometimes they can't get there. And so it is discouraging because you want every patient to have access to this education, every patient and family member to know how to ask for a kidney, how to use these resources. And so that's been our biggest challenge. I think one of the biggest successes has just been able to see the joy on these patients and their families' faces. To be super appreciated for doing something really small as providing this program, to provide that support, like it goes a long way. They're always telling us, thank you for coming out on a Wednesday evening. Thank you for coming out on a Saturday morning. And it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like work at all. It's a joy because you know that everything that you're doing is going to help that patient get transplanted. It makes those families, for those that can't become a donor, they feel helpful in knowing that I can't be a donor for my loved one, but I want to get in this class and I want to learn everything that I can to help my loved one. And so we do that. And it's just a joy. It is a joy to be able to do that because it's so appreciative. When they get that transplant, it is the most amazing thing because they feel better. They start discussing all of the travels and just the things that they're going to be able to do, like going back to work or going back to school. It's something that just changes their lives, but also thinking about the donor, those that are related to them. We've had people that are, like Dr. Locke mentioned, altruistic. They didn't know anybody that directly needed that kidney, but they wanted to do it, and they're so proud and happy to be able to do that, to change that person's life, to save that person's life. And so that's been the biggest joy about this all, is being able to do this. So it's a good thing.
Right, and I can imagine you all are literally giving life to people or extending life. And I can just imagine the joy that would bring. And for us to be a part of this program, us being able to take part in the extension of life or just the giving of life, that is a very powerful feeling. Right? And it is a little bit of altruism, but again, that's the essence of humanity, I think. And so I want to just ask this final question as we begin to wrap up. So what can we as a community do to make your jobs easier, right? So as my students will tell you, as the other professors will tell you, as anyone who knows me will tell you, I'm a firm believer in self-determination, all right? I believe in us taking care of ourselves, us educating ourselves, and just at the end of the day, being responsible for our own growth and development. So how can we be empowered, and how can we help you help us?
Well, I think number one, be you. Keep telling us what we need to be doing. Be the drivers of change. Be the drivers of healthcare and make sure that we're doing it the right way. I think also recognizing that you have a powerful voice in this by helping to tell the stories that we even talked about tonight. I'm not sure how many people even realize that there's 100,000 people who need a kidney, that we don't have enough to go around, that we need living kidney donors. Know that the Navigator program is coming to Tuskegee. that there are people in your community that are in need of kidney transplants. That if you take for one moment the thought of trying to ask someone to give you quite literally a piece of themselves, how hard that would be. And that the purpose of this program is to help teach people how to do that. These folks are going to need to identify champions in their life who are willing to help them tell that story. That may be some of you in this room. They may be coming to you to ask you to be a living kidney donor. So I think having an open mind, knowing that no matter what role you play in all of this is absolutely critically important. Me standing up here talking about this doesn't do it. It's not the same. Friends and family and loved ones and the community. So that's what I would say.
Absolutely, I agree. How many of you all know someone that's in need of a kidney transplant or somebody that's on dialysis, just by show of hands? Wow, it never fails. I always ask that question, and it never fails. There's always at least one. And so knowing that and being here tonight, you can help share this information. Maybe you can help guide somebody in the right direction to get them referred to get on the transplant waiting list. Maybe you can start helping them to find a living donor if they're currently on the waiting list. When we have Navigator classes, we always tell our patients will often ask, well, what if they say no? That's the biggest challenge. What if they say no? Letting them know that it's okay if they say no. But what you can do is turn that negative into a positive and say, if you can't be a donor for me, share my story. And that goes a long way, because that story can reach someone, and you just never know who may be inspired to be that person's living donor. So ask out loud. There may be some others that you don't know are in need of a transplant or on dialysis that haven't even told their stories, because it's difficult, it's hard to talk about that. And just opening up that dialogue, that conversation, to help someone to ask, to share that part of them with you. And now you can be empowered to have this information to go forward and share this in your own communities.
Okay, and since that time, I've had one more question to come in, and I try to get all of the questions answered. And it's, if I donate a kidney to someone, how long is the hospital or downtime, and who covers the cost of transplant? Like who covers that cost?
That's a great question. So the recipient's insurance covers the cost of the donation. So the living donor doesn't incur any of the expenses relation or their time in the hospital or their follow-up. Or if there were some complication, which again would be really unlikely, that would be covered as well. The way we is what we call laparoscopically, so the small incisions, the fancy instruments with the cameras, and the kidney comes out of an incision, believe it or not, about that big. So for those of you, if you can't see me, you're on Twitter, it's, I don't know, a couple of inches, maybe 3 inches, is the biggest incision you'll have. So as a result, you can actually go home the day after your surgery if you want to. Most people spend one more night just to kind of get adjusted to things and making sure they have the right amount of pain medication and that kind of thing. Most people are off pain meds in 2 weeks. You can go back to work as soon as you're off your pain meds. You just can't do heavy lifting for about 4 to 6 weeks. So if you have a job that requires that, we write you a note. You can either hang out or you can be put on light duty.
Oh wow, that's very interesting. So if I receive a kidney from you, my insurance pays for it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very interesting.
But then,
Yes, sir.
if I am poor and destitute, I am on dialysis. My uncle is the match. He's going to give me a kidney. I don't have a lick of insurance.
Mm. Can I get free?
So the cool thing, and things in Congress always happen when something happens to it. I think it was in 1970, one of the Congress people actually had a loved one that developed kidney failure. And the good part about that is that it ended up where they created a system where once you begin dialysis, you qualify for Medicare. So Medicare age. And so your is covered by Medicare. And the government has them a lot of money. Having a kidney transplant is much, much less expensive to the government than about the $85,000 a year they spend to keep someone on dialysis. So dialysis is very expensive, but everyone on dialysis has health insurance. When you come in for your evaluation, we'll make sure that you have the appropriate prescription coverage as well. So there may be a little extra paperwork to fill out to make sure that you have Medicare Part B or the other things you need to cover your immunosuppression medication. But we'll get all of that taken care of so that you're good to go for your transplant. But in terms of your donor, the government will pay for that actually through Medicare if you don't have private insurance.
All right. Well, thank you so much. At this time, I'm going to bring Mr. Rock up to the microphone, and we're going to close out from there.
I'll make this brief. First of all, let's give a round of applause for our presenters. Great information. It's very interesting for our program, and I think that we should have more dialogue in reference to this. Everybody's question probably wouldn't be answered tonight, so I open the door for you all to come back and let's do this again to continue the education process. So thank you. I would like to bring greetings from the city of Tuskegee to our guests from Birmingham, our city manager, Mr. Bernard Houston. Would like to come around, sir? He's in the back. He probably won't come back now. Put him on the spot, but that's okay. Let's give it up for our city's manager.
Good evening, everyone. This is why we don't come out. These folks put us on the spot, and I'm a god-awful public speaker, but this is amazing information. Amazing information. I hate that I didn't make it for all of it. I'm the person with the minority representation for nephrology question. I have to know too. And, yeah, and I did a MedTap program in Ohio, Medicaid Technical Assistance Policy Program. And even with that program, I always send to African American nephrologists. That's the question. But anyway, I'm glad that I was able to make at least a part of it. I hope that everything that was said is value added for you. And I'm hopeful that we'll begin to spread that information.
Thank you very much. Also, we had a local physician to walk in, Dr. Dana Maxwell, who's here. She is looking after someone right now, but we just wanted to acknowledge her as well. Is there any other questions? Anybody else have anything to say before we close out? I know we have colleagues in the back that came down from Birmingham that's here. Would you guys have something to say?
We do have another survey to just follow up to the discussion that we've had tonight. So if everybody would take a moment to fill that out before you leave, we would be very much appreciative.
And also, as we thank you all that are sitting here live, we'd like to thank our social media guests, those of you that are streaming from YouTube, from Twitter, and from Facebook. We'd like to say thank you. And at this point, the local audience will be filling out paperwork. You guys can disconnect at this time. We thank you. And I'll turn it back over to Dr.
All right. All right. Well, I want to give a